For the Beatles and their management, a dark cloud was looming on the horizon. In a March interview with the London Evening Standard newspaper, John Lennon commented, "Christianity will go. It will vanish and shrink. I needn't argue that. I'm right and I will be proved right. We're more popular than Jesus now." As you can imagine, a firestorm of controversy erupted when the interview was reprinted in America 4 months later. Manager Brian Epstein came to John's defense.
What he said and meant was that he was astonished that in the last 50 years, the Church in England, and therefore Christ, had suffered a decline in interest. He did not mean to boast about the Beatles' fame. He meant to point out that the Beatles' effect appeared to be, to him, a more immediate one upon certainly the younger generation.
At a hastily called press conference in Chicago, John attempted to explain what he had meant by the remark. He didn't offer an apology, merely an explanation.
I wasn't saying the Beatles are better than Jesus or God or Christianity. I was using the name Beatles because I can use them easier. And I was using, because I can talk about Beatles as a separate thing. But I could have said TV or cinema or anything else that's popular.
John was learning the hard lesson that fame and popularity have a flip side. The close observation and public scrutiny of a celebrity's every word and deed.
We usually just hung together somehow, and there would always be somebody to lean on when there's four of you. There'd always be somebody that would be together enough to sort of pull you through different phases of it.
The Beatles' most progressive album to date, Revolver, was released in August of 1966. The group began what would be their final concert tour of North America 4 days later. They'd been thinking about it for quite a while, and now the Beatles were finally ready to quit touring. Paul McCartney explains.
So it had been getting difficult to tour for a number of reasons. We started to feel we weren't being heard because all the kids were screaming a lot. We were getting a little fed up with it, after the third or fourth tour. It's not quite as exciting as the first time you ever do it. It was losing its thrill a little bit. And the other three guys have been talking and sort of saying, God, I'm really fed up with touring, we've got to stop this. But I didn't really feel quite as strongly. I thought, no, we should keep going. Until the Candlestick Park gig, and round about then when I started to kind of feel like they did. I started to see what they were saying. Yeah, it's really getting boring, and we're just not having any fun. And so, once the thrill's gone like that, you wonder whether you should continue it.
By the fall of '66, the Beatles had made the hard decision to quit live performing. Fans would obviously feel let down, but the group's energies were now focused on the recording studio.
Because we were getting excited by recording now. Like things like Pepper were coming up. We knew we could have a better time in the studio. We decided not to tell anyone because we knew it would be a bit of a disappointment to a lot of fans. A bit of a disappointment, hell of a disappointment. So we decided the best thing to do was just get on with recording and just sort of think, well, we might tour sometime. But I think in our own minds we knew we would.
In November, the Beatles began a new recording session at Abbey Road. John's classic song, Strawberry Fields Forever, is a good example of the innovation and experimentation that were going on in that studio. The group recorded a first version, then John asked George Martin to do a new arrangement, and they recorded the song again in a different tempo and key.
Then he said, that's great also. He said, but there are bits in the first one I like. I'd like to have a bit of the first and a bit of the second. I said, well, you can't, because the first one's in a different key, and you can't really gear change the thing in the middle. And anyway, they're different tempos. He said, I'm sure you can fix it. He went away and left.
Acclaimed as the greatest album in rock music history, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band was a perfect marriage of pop music and art, and it became the soundtrack for the Summer of Love. Paul remembers,
as they say, as John and George say in the anthology, it started off as a concept. It pretty much then got to be a recording session. I mean, we didn't religiously keep to this concept, but in the end it kind of had a feel, the album. It felt like it was all coming out of one place.
In late August that year, longtime manager Brian Epstein died of a barbiturate overdose in his London apartment. The Beatles publicly admitted to using marijuana and LSD. John Lennon was becoming fascinated with an avant-garde artist named Yoko Ono. And once again, the group had the #1 record in the world, All You Need Is Love. I'm Dick Barkley. Please stay tuned. When Beatles 95 returns, the Fab Four take a bite of the apple. In the fall of '67, the Beatles embarked on a new film project called Magical Mystery Tour. It was the group's first major misstep. Critics jeered and fans were largely indifferent. In February '68, all four Beatles, along with their wives and girlfriends, flew to India to study meditation with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, a man they would later lose faith in. In May of '68, John and Paul flew to New York to announce the formation of Apple, a subject covered in some detail in the Beatles anthology. As he reviewed film footage for that program, what besides the Beatles' youth caught Paul McCartney's eye?
And the other thing, I think, for me, that I should have known all along was that we were pretty good. But, you know, while you're just doing it, and while you're just living it, and while you're just trying to get a song right, you don't always sit back after it and go, got that one right. You sweat the next one.
Recording sessions for the White Album began in May of '68 and stretched over 4 months. A frequent studio guest was Yoko Ono. She and John were in love and had begun appearing in public together more often. In August of '68, Cynthia Lennon sued John for divorce on the grounds of adultery. Many Beatle fans have long blamed Yoko Ono for breaking up the group. She says it just isn't true.
Even when they realized that it was the Beatles who decided to go different ways, the Beatles themselves deciding that. It's not fun to say that. It's much more interesting to say, well, the Dragon Lady broke them up, you know. Oh, wow, you know.
1969 was a year of drama and dissension for the Beatles. Much of it was captured on film by the Let It Be movie crew. Keyboard player Billy Preston tells how he came to appear on the #1 hit record, Get Back. Billy, were you in London specifically to record with the Beatles?
Oh, no, I was with Ray Charles in London, and George was in the audience, and he recognized me and called me the next day and invited me over to see the guys. And when I went over, they were in the studio, you know, recording and filming. And they asked me to sit in with them. You know, I wasn't expecting anything. It was a thrill enough just to be there and playing with them. And I didn't really know about the label credit until the record was out.
Let It Be was produced by Phil Spector. I'm Dick Barkley. We'll be back to wrap up Beatles 95 with Paul McCartney and Yoko Ono were married 2 weeks later at the Rock of Gibraltar. Paul continued to believe that if the Beatles would just get back on the road and play some live concerts like they did in the old days, all their problems would be solved. I asked Paul if there was any chance that he and George and Ringo might do some kind of reunion tour.
I don't think so. You know, we've had like a major, humongous offer from America to do 10 dates across the country, and the money is just ridiculous. You know, it's like scandalous. But to me, this moment, the three of us on our own isn't as exciting as the four of us. And seeing as the Beatles was always four, and people will say, well, wouldn't you get Julian or maybe get Sean to sort of help us? It's still not the same. I mean, the Beatles was the Beatles. The minute you got two of them or three of them, it's not the Beatles.
The Beatles gave it one last try in 1969. The result was the brilliant album Abbey Road, with great songs contributed by all four group members. Sadly, the Beatles had run their course, and Paul says the reasons for the final breakup were many.
It was just a kind of, you know, a bit of a disillusionment with the whole thing. I think John was keen to get on with his relationship with Yoko. That was a new relationship he was very excited with. And in my mind, you know, if he was ever going to get on with Yoko, he kind of had to make a break with us. Alan Klein had come in, who was a New York business manager I didn't like. A couple of the guys liked him, but I had a big problem with him. So that didn't help. I think we were all getting a bit fed up with the whole thing, you know.